Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's quick review for the OA Season 1. This video is a part of a series of videos where I give a quick spoiler-free review of a show currently airing. These videos are aimed more at those who haven't seen the show, but those who have will know more of what I'm talking about. This video is where I review Season 1 of the Netflix series The OA. This review will contain some spoilers from the first two episodes because it's impossible to talk about the premise of the show otherwise. So if you want to come into the show completely fresh, you may want to wait to watch this video until after you've seen the first two episodes. But if you're not too touchy about spoilers, this video should be okay, as I just talk about the general premise of the show and don't give away any specifics, especially not from the later half of the season. So I decided to watch the OA knowing absolutely nothing about the show. I didn't read any articles or watch any trailers. All I knew was what I saw on the Netflix page, that it was a crazy fantasy show. And I saw a picture of a woman in this space-like room full of stars. So I thought it would be a very fantastical fantasy show that's like off the walls with magical creatures and space travel and psychics and all of that. But that's not what I got when I watched the show. In fact, I wish I had watched a video like this one before watching the show so I'd know a bit more of what to expect. As instead of an off-the-walls fantasy, what I saw was a story of a woman who inexplicably returned after missing for 7 years, and she refers to herself not by her given name, Prairie, but as the OA. Sure, it has some fantastical elements, such as Prairie apparently was blind before she went missing and now she can see perfectly. But other than that, it's pretty by-the-numbers modern drama of how her and her parents cope with her return, and she ends up befriending 5 people around the neighborhood whom she meets with every night, and tells the story of where she was in those missing years. And it turns out she was in fact abducted and held against her will along with 3 other people. So the show then follows the everyday mundane lives of the 5 others she tells this story to. 4 of them are high school students, and the 5th is a high school teacher. There's a bully, a transgendered boy, a model student, a misfit druggie, and the run-of-the-mill lonely middle-aged teacher. So the majority of the show actually plays out like an average contemporary high school drama. But of course, the fantasy elements grow in the story that the OA tells, which just gets more fantastical as they go. However, even this storyline, for the most part, plays out like a typical abduction kidnap storyline about a very shady guy holding these 4 young people against their will. And the OA, or Prairie, tells the story of how horrible it was to be held against her will, where they were tortured on a regular basis. However, it is revealed that the abductor is in fact a scientist who is running experiments on his subjects, all of them who had an incident in their lives where they had been declared dead, but somehow managed to survive. But again, this isn't a nice guy, and he's clearly the villain, and in fact, a lot of this storyline is very dreary and disturbing, and can be a bit taxing, especially on a binge watch. So this isn't at all what I was expecting to see. So after I watched the first episode, I did go ahead and read some reviews on the show. In fact, I read 2 different articles. The first one I read talked about how the show was a pure masterpiece, and it did give away far more details about the show than I do in this review. The other article stated that the author didn't know if they loved the show or if they hated the show, or was just in awe that it got made in the first place, and often referred to it as new age garbage, and that the show writers must have come up with the idea while they were high and talking to an owner of a new age bookshop. And as I watched the show, I found myself disagreeing with both of these reviews, as I didn't see it as a masterpiece, but on the other hand, I felt the other article was far too harsh on it, as frankly I didn't see the show as that outrageous or out there as that article was presenting it to be. However, if I were to sum up my own feelings about the OA, I would have to say I was mostly disappointed. There were great, rich characters and some very interesting storylines, but like Rakan Stark, it seemed that the show often zigs when it should have zagged. In other words, I see a lot of wasted potential, as it has the groundwork with some really interesting characters played by good actors with high production value, with a fascinating story that sets up a lot of interesting mysteries. The problem comes in first in the pacing, as it moves a tad bit too slow to hold my interest, and secondly, whenever some of these mysteries are resolved, the resolutions are mostly disappointing. For example, I found the explanation as to why Prairie now calls herself the OA to be pretty weak and not at all what I was expecting. And it often seems like the show throughout the series was letting me down, as whenever an opportunity seemed to present itself to introduce a very fascinating plot point, the show often squandered it. But of course, its worst offense was the season finale, which was the biggest disappointment of all. The show was structured in such a way that it was building to what the revelations and bigger meanings behind the stories were, and thus it made the quality of the entire season very dependent on how good these revelations were handled and how well they were told, and unfortunately, it was not handled very well. I personally found the final episode to be very poorly written, almost like it was rushed without giving it much thought, as it used several overused TV show tropes and cliches while presenting storylines literally out of nowhere, while at the same time failing to give significant meaning to the storylines that it had been building to this point. In short, it was a failure. And to be honest, because of the structure of the season, everything hinged on this finale. Had this finale been a masterpiece, then I probably would have declared the entire season a masterpiece, but because it failed so miserably, I'm going to have to say the entire season did as well. So my rating for the OA, season 1 out of 10, is a 4 poor. I don't think this show totally sucked, nor do I consider my time watching it wasted, as it featured some rich characters, great actors, and certain moments that will stick with me for a long time. But looking back on the season as a whole, I have to say it's a bit of a mess, and it fails to satisfy, as it relies a bit too heavily on the audience having an extreme interest in these specific New Age beliefs. Its structure kind of falls apart. Now, I do believe that this show has a strong following of many who are ready to declare it the best show of recent times. That's fine if you feel that way. Everyone has their opinions. I'm just stating my opinion. So please don't tell me that I don't get the show, because I totally see what they were going for. I just personally believe that they failed to convey it properly. And as for the question of will I watch the next season, I'm going to have to go with no. As much as I enjoyed some of this season, I do think the overarching story failed to hold my interest and fumbled too many times for me to want to come back for a second season. The season even ended on a cliffhanger, which I'm sure many are on pins and needles waiting to see, but honestly, I have no interest in seeing how it's resolved, as I felt the setup of this cliffhanger was so poorly handled, it failed to captivate me. So that's it for my review of the OA. Be sure to keep an eye on my channel for more quick reviews on shows currently airing to come, as well as many more videos on shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, Vikings, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.